My name is Frank van der Heijden. I'm a regional archaeologist with Heritage New Zealand. Heritage New Zealand is this country's leading heritage agency. We promote the identification, protection and conservation of New Zealand's historical and cultural heritage, which includes archaeological sites.
Opus and Heritage New Zealand are working together to manage the Canterbury earthquake rebuild work on archaeological sites. The archaeological work being carried out in Christchurch is primarily salvage archaeology. We are recovering as much information as possible before it is destroyed forever. The study of this is not only important to our national identity, but has repercussions for archaeological work in urban settings across the world.
South Shore is an interesting area in that it's a consolidated sand spit with estuarine resources such as these cockle shells on one side and the Pacific Ocean on the other, with also rich in fish and other shellfish.
New Zealand is a relatively young country. It was only settled about 800 years ago. And through archaeology we can actually find and discover the traces of the very first inhabitants, the first Polynesians who came here in the 13th century, but as well as the first Europeans who arrived in the late 18th century. We know this area was used as a mahinga kai, so there was a huge food gathering in the estuary here. And that can tell us a bit about when people lived here, whether it was seasonal, whether it was permanent, how long they lived here for, and what foods they came here to gather.
As we go through the earthquake recovery residential repair work, we're finding more and more evidence of where that occupation actually is.
What we have here is a house with history. A history that goes back to the founding of Christchurch in the 1850s. A house that extends right up into the 20th century with the Upham family. We're trying to figure out what the date of this building is. We think roughly 1870s. We know it was extensively modelled in the 1930s, but the archaeology here is about tracing the modifications, record the level of detail that tells us when things happened. There's actually record of a house being here from the 1860s. So on this site we'll be looking at the house. We'll be trying to piece together the history of changes, but we'll also be trying to look under the ground to see if the early house is still there as well. What have we found from the site so far? A good collection of material that tells us about the earliest inhabitants of the house. We've got food remains, we've got the rubbish, we've got ceramics, and patternware is fantastic for dating. We can get a really clear date for when this material came from. All of this information we pulled together to come up with a social history, an economic history, an understanding of not just the people living in this house, but the broad pattern across all of Christchurch.
I'm Simon Abernethy, Earthworks Project Manager for Arrow International, working on the Southern Response project. Southern Response and Arrow have a commitment to identifying and protecting archaeological sites. Screening is done early in the process to identify risk and to ensure the correct process is followed on site. We work closely with Heritage New Zealand, Opus and iwi to ensure we protect New Zealand's heritage.
The Heritage New Zealand Pohara Tonga Act has provisions for archaeological sites, and anybody who wants to undertake any work that affects an archaeological site needs a consent from us, which is called an archaeological authority. And that's just to ensure the process that any archaeological information that is there is captured as part of the development. Well, not having an authority is not only an offence which can result in a prosecution and a fine, but it also prevents us from learning more about the history of that particular site. We lose valuable information that we could have gained through a controlled excavation or controlled monitoring of the works.
As part of Southern Response and Arrow's commitment to raising awareness across the project on archaeological sites and the legal requirements on these sites, we've produced a series of educational videos which will not only be of benefit to those working on the project, but the wider industry involved in the Christchurch rebuild.
The archaeological work that we are doing here in Christchurch is an amazing opportunity for us archaeologists, not only to explore an urban setting, but also for me personally to explore my hometown. The information we are recovering not only links us directly with our history and the beginnings of our city, but leaves a lasting legacy for all of those who will come after us.